So just got done installing the max effort ported Kong 2650 on my Demon, and I wanted to talk about the differences I've seen, kind of go over a little bit of an overview of what I see different with this blower compared to the regular 2650 that I actually previously had on my Hellcat, and just show the differences I've seen at my elevation with the similar pulley setups that I had on my Hellcat and the differences. But right off the bat, and I'll put some of the images up on the screen as I talk through this, I'll show, so the port, you'll notice on the snout opening, you'll actually notice a much big difference there. So there's a lot of porting that gets done on the snout and on the entry to the actual rotors, and so that's where you'll see them. Here are some images of when I first got the blower from Kong. So comes in a nice engineered package. You'll notice here the snout is really where the porting, you see the most obvious porting done. So you'll notice the opening in the snout is much bigger, and as you look deeper into the supercharger itself, you'll notice the entry right before you hit the rotors has been heavily ported as well. So you'll notice that difference right off the bat on the porting on the snout here. They do not port the runners on the side, so those don't get ported. You'll see the porting just in the snout and in the entry of the supercharger. Those are the differences you'll see right off the bat, externally. And I'm still running a 130mm throttle body with my setup. I know some people mentioned their tuners have discouraged them from doing it, whether about drivability or running a 130mm on stock motor. I've never had any issues both tuning or running it on stock motors, so I went with it. It is a much bigger expense. It's $1,300 versus if you already have a 108 you're running on a ported blower, you can just use the adapter and run that. And most setups would actually still make great power on that. I'm running a 130mm Motorworks intake. On my previous setup, I was running the B Woody, which is 5 inches. So that's about 127mm, not quite 130. But on this setup, I am running a 130 from Motorworks that they just recently dropped for the Challenger and Charger Hellcats. One thing to mention on this, the Motorworks specifically, is you don't have the PCV provision or the IAT provision. So you have to relocate your IAT somewhere else. I put mine in the coupler for now, so it's in the coupler. I'm still getting a reading just in the coupler in between the throttle body and the intake. You can either tap this, but you have to be really careful about really drilling into this material to get the sensor in there. And then as far as the PCV, I'm actually venting to this catch can here. So this is a UPR catch can. So I'm venting both sides of my PCV from the valve covers to that catch can, so I'm not running a tube to the intake anymore. And there's actually a sensor that runs in between here, right? So those of you that are familiar, you'll know there's a sensor there. You're gonna have to eliminate that in your tune, so just something to look out for. Greg from Kong actually sent me one of these idler brackets. I had a lot of belt slip when I previously ran the 235 upper on my Hellcat. This has basically eliminated that. You'll notice there's not any belt dust. This essentially would get black after a few runs on my Hellcat. What this does is it doesn't necessarily just add more tension, but it changes the wrap geometry, so the amount of belt wrap that you're getting on your pulley. So it's not always about being tight on the belt, but rather how much of that belt is gripping your pulley. So you'll see here the way these two dual idlers position the belt, more of it is hugging that upper pulley, so you're going to get less slip that way. This has been a huge game changer for me since I'm running a really small upper pulley. So I'm at about 5,200 foot elevation, so it's hard to make boost up here. So just having that is a huge difference maker for me. My pulley setup's a 235 upper. I'm running the stock lower, so rather than get into the car and put in a lower pulley, I'm just running a really small upper on the stock lower. And it's really basically the same thing. So all you're trying to do is change the pulley ratio to spin the blower faster. So I'm just running a really small upper with the stock lower, and it ends up being similar to like a 10% lower and a 275 upper. I'm going to play a few videos here back to back just to show the progression of when I first got this car a couple months ago to doing just an upper pulley on the stock blower and to now running the Kong 2650 on a really small pulley and E85, just to show you guys the difference. So I'll put those descriptions here and then show those 3 videos back to back. So check. So that just gives you a good visual of what the car's actually, how it's performing at my elevation. So cars are much slower here. We have much less air, and so we have to push supercharged cars to spin much harder just to make similar boost levels to those at elevation. But it's really a huge improvement from when we started here at baseline. I'm going to show some logs now. So let's take a look at these logs. If you look at some logs here, so you'll see this is on the ported Kong 2650. So I'm seeing a manifold air pressure about 36. So my actual boost based on my elevation is about 24 psi. And here we'll see the manifold air pressure on my Hellcat, which was on basically the exact same pulley setup. And so you'll see it's much lower. I was seeing much less PSI at the same pulley level, which tells you that at the same pulley size, the supercharger is flowing that much more air. And so for me at high elevation, I'm already struggling for air up here. So being able to flow more air at the same pulley ratio is really beneficial to me. So I'm obviously pushing the car really hard up here, even with the fact that I have no air. I'm still pushing the car really hard with an aggressive pulley setup, but you know, I know the limits, I know the risks, and so I'm willing to take that. But just really goes to show how much more the Kong is flowing now that it's ported versus at an unported state. And we'll do the same thing here. So this is my Hellcat on the non-ported Kong 2650 on a 2.5 pulley. So the max manifold air pressure there you'll see is about 31.94. So that's about 20 pounds once you subtract the atmospheric pressure. And I'll pull up the exact same pulley setup, but now for the Demon. So on the Demon, we'll take a look here on the 2.5. And we'll see that the max manifold air pressure now is about 34 here at the higher RPM. So that's showing essentially a 2 psi, 2.5 psi gain of boost just from the porting on the same pulley ratio, same exact pulley setup. So much more boost is running now that we're running the Kong ported supercharger. And what that means is it's not necessarily, you never really want to think in terms of pressure, but you want to think in terms of airflow, and you're getting much more airflow at the same pulley ratio, which just means the blower is more. I hope this has been helpful for those of you trying to decide whether to go ported or unported. It's really about your build and really what goals you're trying to have with the setup. My next steps on this, I'm going to do a crank pin kit, I'm going to dyno, and then I'm going to switch to the Kong lid, which has a better design and is supposed to make more horsepower. So we'll actually do a dyno day where we swap the lid and do back-to-back runs. So that should be really informational for everybody. And then after we do that last dyno session, our next project, so I just pulled this TVS 2300 out of the Jeep SRT8, and I still have my Demon blower. Just need to get a lid and some bricks, and I'm gonna take that and do a Demon blower swap onto my Jeep SRT8. So we just prepped this guy last night. I've neglected this car a little bit, so now we're getting it back going, but we'll be putting a Demon supercharger in here and seeing how it does, so stay tuned.